You're listening to the Meditation and Attachment Podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome everybody. This is Meditation and Attachment, Deepening Your Practice. It's September 23rd, 2021 at 7:37 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, and we've been talking for the last couple of weeks about exploring for meaningfulness. And I was talking about how attachment conditioning affects the capacity to explore. And I think that we talked about that enough that we might then begin to talk about what's meaningful. What is the nature of the human experience? What is the nature of this lifetime that you're in? What is beyond the limited sense of identity, the limited sense of self? And how do you touch that into the nature of beingness, of the spirit of everything? And is that actually the meaningfulness that we're intended to be pursuing, rather than say other things that might come up and grab our attention? I think in some sense meaningfulness is in one end and distraction at the other. Often the pursuit of pleasure is in that process of distraction. One of the difficulties about talking about the meaningfulness that comes from spiritual investigation is that we often try to engage the experience of the self and explain it to the experience of self in such a way that the self can understand it. And I think often it's so often described as wordless or timeless, or all of these different concepts which the self doesn't really adapt to very well. And then when you're in the state where the self isn't actually active, but you're still in awareness and present, the experience of it then would have to be translated into words that then the sense of self could understand. So we're often talking about these things in descriptions that don't really make sense. I often tell a story about the pursuit of meaning in a way that is about preferences. What are you doing with this life that you have? Understanding that in this life that we have the, particularly when you're in a householder position, these basic householder tasks to perform. How do you keep a roof over your head? The basic things: food, shelter, clothing, medicine. In the commerce system that we have, often we are trading time for resources, and often the activities that we're able to engage in to produce those resources don't have so much meaning. They're what we would call a secondary exploration, where you pursue the resources that you need then to have a primary exploration. One of the things that I noticed about that kind of activity, even though I did intend to have a primary exploration, the consumption of energy in order to do the secondary exploration, to get the resources to do the primary exploration, took most of my ability, and the primary exploration became secondary, if I was able to do it at all. So part of this is beginning to order the way that you want to live so that you can focus on things that have meaning. And the other thing about our culture is that remuneration isn't particularly even, and some things are remunerated at a greater rate than other things. And what happens to you if the things that you find really meaningful are not very well paid? How do you manage that? Do you then shrink down or truncate the kind of life that you can lead? And people are also valued differently in our culture. It's one of the things I notice about in the work that I do is that anyone who isn't white has an impact from the racist nature of our culture. It's like an expense that people who are not who are white don't have. I mean, obviously the whiteness is not remunerated the same either. When I got sober in 1978, and I really didn't know what to do, my first sponsor said to me, well, what kind of apples do you like? And I said, I don't really like apples. They're hard and sour. And he said, well, Granny Smiths are, but there's a lot of different kinds of apples. What other kinds of apples do you like? But I didn't really have a sense of other apples. And so he sent me to the Korean deli to get a Granny Smith and one other apple and eat them both. And then the next day go back and buy 2 more apples, the one I liked better, and the next one in the line. At that time there was 26 varieties of apples at the Korean deli on the corner. And at the end of that process, I came to this understanding that actually Gala apples were the thing for me. And I still like them, and I probably still have a couple in the fridge, 45 years later. But whether or not I eat an apple in a particular day doesn't really drive the sense of meaningfulness I have. It's a kind of pleasant preference. And so we might have to go a little bit deeper into the things that have meaning and that lead us along the path of our lives. I notice that one of the things that I find really meaningful are relationships. And I have preferences of people. And when I find somebody I really have a strong preference for, I like to put a lot of energy into the relationship, and so I can have it available to me. And then that connection, that sense of feeling seen and known by somebody else has a lot of meaning. And it also creates a base to explore into things that have meaning. Ideas are also something that have meaning for me, and my practice of meditation has meaning for me, and the sense of coming into this place of being connected to the experience of being alive has a lot of meaning. But it doesn't translate into activities often. It's simply a way of being able to be in this vibratory energy of being alive and experiencing the moment as it unfolds. I think that the way that Dan described it is touching into the sacredness of the experience of being alive. And as you transform your view, beginning to recognize in each moment the sacredness of this experience of being alive, and experiencing each moment in this container of sacredness. So then what does that mean? What does sacredness mean? That this extraordinarily precious moment that you're in, can you touch into that experience of it? And if you can't, what is it that prevents you from being able to touch into that? And then how do you pull out and clear away those obscurations so that you can see actually what's there? The metaphor is often that the sun is shining, and it's continuously shining, and that if you're not aware of it shining, then the clouds have obscured the sunlight, but it doesn't mean that the sunlight isn't there if you could remove the clouds and touch into it. What I find interesting about trying to convey this in language and in the experience of a self is that I have a feeling sense of it. And I have the experience of abiding in that place with no urgency to do anything else. And that the moments last for periods of time. And then the moment seems to end, and then it's the next thing that unfolds, this movement back and forth. I was talking to Dan about this, and I was noticing that I was getting irritated by the ordinariness of the self-experience arising and taking me out of that sense of limitless sacredness, and which is when he said, no preference. No preference. So I remember, of course, I don't know how long ago, a decade ago, Shinzen basically saying the same thing. You come in and out of self, and there's no preference for one or the other. There's no inhibition in the flow of one or another. And I remember sitting at Mount Baldy listening to Sasaki Roshi say, my job as a meditation teacher is essentially to be a travel agent, taking you effortlessly from heaven to hell. That sense of coming and going, fixating, flowing, fixating, flowing. So is that enough? That a definition of what's meaningful? And then how do you practice it in a way that actually you can get there? You may have noticed in our culture the current rage is psychedelics. I'm old enough actually to remember the last time that was all the rage. And I listened to the descriptions of it, and people have these transcendent experiences, depending on whether they're taking heroic doses, which I also think of as it's a very pleasant way of thinking about it. And I was talking about this, and you take this heroic dose, and you come into this place of transcendence, and you touch into the sacred nature of things, and then you come out of it. Of course, you don't have real agency to come back, and you're not flowing in and out of this. You're not fixating, unfixating, fixating, unfixating. One of my friends sent me a note that said, that's true of everything except for the smoking toad, which I have not done personally, but I thought that was also hilarious. I'm assuming that if it gets really popular, the toad itself will become endangered. And I think that I have a bias toward actually just practicing in a way that you can come into that place of being able to come and go in and out of that sacredness, or I don't have the experience of just being in the sacred place the whole time and then just coming in and out of that self-experience. One of my students said to me the other day, I don't mean this in a bad way, George, but you've lost your edge, which I thought also was really funny. She said that the practice that you're doing has softened you, and it's easier to be with you than it used to be. So this is it. Meaningfulness is to touch into the sacred nature of this human experience, and how do you come into that place where that's what you can do, and then can you then sustain that sense of sacredness continuously without getting trapped or confined to a contractive experience of self. And then it doesn't matter so much what the activity is. Maybe you're doing the dishes, or you're tidying up the house, or you're arranging to talk to someone, and you're in that place where it's rich in meaning. There's a shift. Bodhicitta is often the term. The heart breaks open, and all of a sudden you're not confined to the pursuits that are satisfying to the sense of self. You see yourself in this community of people, the community of the world, and your actions are oriented more toward that. I think that this might be quite useful in the world that we live in, because these pursuits of enrichment and these pursuits of social status and power, particularly with the population where it is, are taxing the planet to the point that the shifts that are coming are going to be quite difficult. I'm a fan of Thomas Piketty, and he's an economist. And one of the things that I thought was interesting about his latest book, Capitalism and Ideology, was the dilemma the world is facing as the climate changes, and the reliance on monoculture for growing enough food for all of us, is that if there's a 3 degrees, say, change in the temperature, which it's likely that we're going to have, the way that we've been growing all of this food isn't going to survive the climate change, and there's going to be a interruption of the food supply, and the West is actually pretty well set up to manage that. It takes 70 portions of grain to create 1 portion of meat. And the population in Western Europe and North America is, which has a land mass equivalent to, say, India and Asia, China, has 1/3 of the population, and it's largely, in his thinking, because we have a meat-centric diet, and so there's less food, so the population is expanded at a slower pace than in India or China, which was largely vegetarian. What that means, of course, is that when the food supply contracts, the West simply has to switch to a plant-based diet in order to have enough food to accommodate the population. But the parts of the world that are already vegetarian will not be able to switch, and their food supply is going to be much more dire than our food supply. How do we then embrace this as a planet? The other thing that you may have read in Understanding Climate Change is that about 20% of the planet is going to become uninhabitable because of the temperature rise, which is mainly the equator, and that those people are going to have to move north. And so you have all of these refugees that are already engaged. I think I saw in Weiwei's movie about refugees that there's currently 68 million people who are refugees moving. What happens when 20% of the planet is uninhabitable, and it's not 68 million people, but a billion people that are needing to move, and that the food supply is taxed to the point that it's going to be difficult? What are we going to do? We built a wall along the border, a 30-foot wall. Do you think that a 30-foot wall is going to keep 15 million people from coming in when there's no place for them to go? How do you make sense of that? What meaning do you derive from our collective actions that are creating a situation in the world? And how then do we respond to that? Moving in and out of the fixated sense of self into this sacredness. How do we come into this place of sacredness so that we can see that these things are happening, and that we can then respond to them in a way that is useful? Part of the climate change, of course, is sea level rise, and so I was reading in the New York Times that in this country there's going to be 18 million refugees based on the loss of property because of the sea level rising. So even if we build a wall all the way around the whole country, we still have 18 million refugees inside of the wall that we're going to have to attend to in some way. And can we reorient ourselves in a way that isn't going to be so brutal? So when I think about that pursuit of a spiritual life, and a touching into the nature of that sacredness, that spirit, I also come back into this body that lives in this country, that is a citizen of this country, and the responsibilities that come with that, and the sense of that. We're in the middle of a pandemic. You may have been affected by that. And that sense of brutality is there in simply allowing the course of this without taking these simple preventative actions. And I was reading in the paper today that Alaska, of all of the states, has the highest level of infection with the Delta variant, and the whole healthcare system is collapsing, and the governor still says that it isn't a situation that warrants the response that would require any measures to curtail the pandemic. No masks, no quarantines, no vaccines. And I have a really hard time making sense of that. Why wouldn't we want to do everything to preserve this precious, sacred life that we're experiencing, knowing that it's so temporary? what is that view that it is that to me appears to be indifferent, without compassion. And then how do you hold a compassionate view of somebody that you experience as being without compassion and engaged in activities that are actively harming? How do you make meaning out of that for yourself so that you're engaged in an ethical response? So my experience of that is to when the experience of that limited identity overheats and becomes too painful, to simply move out into that expansive spirit space and then flow back into the sense of self, so that actions can be taken that are useful, and then if it heats up too much, moving out into this expansiveness. So I think that's all I want to say about this. If your practice isn't at the place where you can move into that and touch into that sense of sacredness, and it's not, and that it's not there most of the time, then focus where your practice is and begin to develop that capacity I guess the way that I like to talk about it is the view. Can you understand what a view is? Can you discern one view from another? Do you have agency in causing the view that you want, and can you sustain a view? In the Metta practice, we are really using views as an object of meditation so that you can begin to have a sensitivity to what a view is, then how to maintain it. Oops, I'm trying to get this to stay up. When we look at it through the attachment lens, obviously the people that have a sense of view, a sense of being able to think about thinking, metacognition, it comes from the experience of the caregiver inquiring about what your internal experience is, so that you look inward, and then you develop the capacity to describe what that experience is, so that you can in each moment recognize it and then communicate it. And that also creates this process of where you understand what your view is, and then you understand how to communicate it, and you understand that the other person has a view that then, or an experience where they can take that in, and you have some sense about how that lands, which creates this dimension of you and the other person and the interaction between it. In the Satipatthana Sutta, we call that mindfulness of inside, mindfulness of outside, and mindfulness of inside and out. That there's a reaction that you have in experiencing someone else, and someone else has a reaction in experiencing you, and you can track that. Christian?
I think that the metacognition is, that's something that kind of gets embedded, or that's something you really have to consciously practice. Can you lose the skill, do you think?
I have a little trouble understanding you.
You can't hear me, or?
So, yeah, a little louder, please.
Oh, sorry. I'm wondering if the metacognition, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
The metacognition, is that something that you have to consciously keep practicing? Or is that something that gets sort of embedded, or you lose it?
Well, I think that if you get stressed, it collapses, right? It's cognitive. So your cognitive function is present when you're in good, sort of an even balanced state. And if there's a lot of stressors, it collapses, and so that you don't have it. And then when you come back into balance, it returns. But the capacity to do it is something that you can develop and train. Is that a good answer?
George, don't we want to have better metacognition during stressful situations? Why did nature do this to us?
We do want to have that. And so then we would also be talking about emotional regulation skills so that you don't get completely dysregulated so that your cognitive function collapses. All of that can be trained. But why don't we do some practice, and then I want to give you a choice. Do you want to work on the Vipassana side of things, looking at that aspect, or do you want to work on the metta side, looking at views? Metta? Carol? Is everybody in favor of metta? Everybody in favor of Vipassana? Metta wins. So go ahead and settle in, and I will be right back. So any comments or questions about the practice we did? I forgot to use the other microphone, I see. So thanks for practicing. What's coming up here is in October we have a level 1, 3 weekends, 2 in October, 1 in November. There are 4 places left in the year-end retreat. If you want to come to that, it's on the website. We're going to start another level 2 in January. And we're going to do a meditation and addiction retreat in February. That's what's coming up, so take a look at that on the website. Thank you for coming. I offer the teaching freely, but I do hope you'll make a donation. There's a link to do that on the website. Any amount is appreciated. It helps support me and also the work that Mettagroup is doing. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you soon, I hope. Bye now.